Welcome back. As you know, we are going through the Passion Week, exploring the life and ministry of Jesus from Sunday to Sunday, from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday. And we handled Palm Sunday last Sunday with a great experience about the peace that Jesus brings, the humility that Jesus brings, that he's a counter king, bringing a counter kingdom, a kingdom of peace and love and grace and forgiveness as opposed to kings of war. Then on Monday, Jesus cleanses the temple. He is irate that the house of God was being used as a den of thieves, as religious leaders were manipulating people and particularly manipulating them to get money to enrich themselves. And so he overturned the temple. That made the religious leaders irate. And so on Tuesday, they start following him around, looking for every possible way to grab him, to trap him. And so they ask him a bunch of questions trying to trap him, which doesn't work. And then he just unleashes on them 7 woes. We detailed that yesterday. Very fierce attacks against the religious leaders. And so, of course, they had it. They were done with him. They wanted him dead. And so Wednesday, we have nothing said about Jesus, but everything said about what the Pharisees did, the religious leaders did, to ensure that Jesus would die. In fact, on Wednesday, there's an entire focus on how to kill Jesus through the betrayal of Judas. And so let's read in Matthew 23. At the same time, the leading priests and elders were meeting at the residence of Caiaphas, the high priest, plotting how to capture Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during Passover celebration, they agreed, or the people may riot. Passover was a big deal, the high holy feast celebrating freedom of slavery out of Egypt. And it was a high holy day, so they knew the people would not tolerate at all some sort of secret plot to kill Jesus during the Passover. So they had to very carefully manage it. Now, Wednesday was the day before Passover, and so that's when they had to plot. And so Wednesday was a plot day. Thursday was Passover day, so that Friday they would be able to have Jesus killed. That was the plan. And so what they did was they executed him by plotting with Rome. Now, in order for Rome to agree to the execution of a Jew, there had to be some kind of a threat against the state, a threat against the state of Rome. Rome was not interested in the Jewish religious capital crimes. So if somebody committed a crime that the law said they need to be put to death, Rome would say, no, you can't do that. We're superseding you. We only put to death people who pose a threat to Rome. So the religious leaders had a tricky task in front of them if they wanted Jesus dead. They wanted him dead because they thought Jesus broke the religious law, which goes to show you just how corrupt religion can be when they are so distorted by their religious blindness that they, using their religion, was going to put to death the fullness of divinity. I mean, it's just insane, the power and the evil of religion. And so here they are, they have a problem. They want to persecute Jesus for breaking religious law, but they know Rome would only allow them to persecute Jesus for a political capital crime. So the kingpin of this is Judas. Now, Judas is a friend of Jesus, a follower of Jesus, one of the core disciples of Jesus, and he's a very interesting person. Not a lot is said about Judas. There's a few things that are mentioned, and one encounter in particular where we start to see sort of his motivation. So let's look to Matthew 26:14. Then Judas Iscariot, and that's key, Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Now, this was likely happening on that Wednesday of the Passion Week. Now, because not a lot is said about Judas, what we can surmise from his, I guess we can call it his last name, Judas Iscariot, typically in the Near East, your last name determines where you're from. Now, Iscariot is a region in Judah. So Judas was the only disciple from Judea. And this is the southern, more elite region of Israel. Everybody else was from Galilee. So just think of Galilee as in the north. That's kind of hillbilly territory. Uneducated, peasants, poor people. Then you have the south, which is the Judah, which is the capital region of Jerusalem. And that's where the more educated people are. And so Judas was likely educated, hanging around a bunch of uneducated people. And so he was probably somewhat arrogant, always looking down on other people. But he saw something very special about Jesus, and so he followed Jesus. Now, it is said, and this cannot be verified, but it is documented to a degree that Judas had sympathies towards the zealots. He was hanging around Simon a little bit, and there's some connection between Judas and Simon. Simon is called out as a zealot. And Judas likely had sympathies towards zealots. Now, zealots wanted a military revolt against Rome from the capital city, Jerusalem. And so this was their whole passion, was they wanted Jesus to rise up as a military king and have this revolt from Jerusalem to overturn and overthrow Rome so that they can have their independence back. This was their whole vision. They wanted independence. They wanted power. They wanted God to bless them with political power, with military power. This was their goal. Definitely Simon, probably Judas. So to paint a little picture of Judas, he was educated, likely a little bit arrogant, looking down on the other disciples from Galilee, but he saw so much in Jesus, so much power as he healed people, and power in his message, and power in this message particularly of a kingdom, and then thousands of people flocking to Jesus. Judas probably thought to himself, you know what, this is the one who's going to overthrow Rome. And that was likely his motivation until it all came crashing down. It all came crashing down on that Passion Week. So here comes Jesus riding in on a donkey, which is a burden of peace. And it's a beast of burden of peace. It's a beast of burden that is humble. And so Judas is likely thinking to himself, wait a minute, I'm here with my sort of zealot tendencies, wanting to see Israel rise through political power, and Jesus rides in on a donkey. He was likely not very impressed with that. He didn't want humility. He didn't want peace. He didn't want palm branches. He wanted swords. He wanted war. So he's likely very upset and disillusioned then. This was the grand moment. This is Jesus entering Jerusalem as king, and he rides in on a donkey, and people are waving palm branches of peace. That was not his plan. And also you have the total rejection from the religious leaders. And so I guess in Judas's mind, you can see this vision of Jesus riding in on a war horse, and the entire political infrastructure of Judea, particularly Jerusalem, submitting to Jesus and taking up arms and going after Rome. That is not what happened. He comes in peace, and then the religious leaders totally reject him. So Judas was likely very disillusioned. In fact, just before they went to Jerusalem, there was this minor encounter between Jesus and Judas, and it likely reveals a lot of the tension that was growing between Jesus and Judas. So Judas was the money keeper. Keep in mind, Jesus and the band of travelers were living off of donations, and Judas kept the money. And we find out later that he was actually skimming some of this money off. So he had some love of money for sure. And there's this one encounter before Jesus came into Jerusalem with a woman who was pouring expensive perfume on Jesus' feet. And she was just worshiping him. It's all she had, and she was giving it expensive perfume, giving him praise by pouring this perfume on his feet. Now Judas kind of gently rebukes this woman and says she's kind of wasting money. Why pour all this perfume on Jesus' feet? And then he says we can give it to the poor. Now I'm not sure he was very sincere about that, but he said this is kind of a waste of money. And what he was doing was kind of downplaying the importance of Jesus, because she was worshiping him, and he was saying, no, I don't think we need that. She was worshiping him with expensive perfume, and Judas was saying, that's kind of a waste of money. So he's kind of disrespecting Jesus, disrespecting her. And then Jesus turns to Judas and gently rebukes him and says, listen, I'm not going to be here for very much longer. Let her worship me in this way. I'm not going to be here very much longer. Now, what did that mean to Judas? It meant that Jesus was serious when he said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem to die. It wasn't some weird metaphor you had to kind of figure out. He meant he was going to Jerusalem to die. What's Judas' vision? Judas' vision is a king. King Jesus is going to take over Jerusalem. He's going to be enthroned as king. And yet he says, I'm going to die. So Judas was disillusioned all throughout this week. And so he's done with Jesus. He approaches the Pharisees. He approaches the religious leaders. He knows they want him dead. He says, what are you going to pay me? And what do they offer him? A measly $600. That's it. $600 in today's money. Now, Judas wasn't really interested in getting rich off of this. He was just interested in being done with Jesus. Jesus had disillusioned him. Jesus, in a sense, from Judas' perspective, betrayed him. Judas thought when Jesus was preaching about a kingdom, he was preaching about a military kingdom, a kingdom of warfare. And here Jesus, right to the end, is a king of peace and humility and service to others. And Judas would have nothing to do with it. So Judas betrayed Jesus because he thought Jesus was a fraud. He thought Jesus was a fraud. Now, what I want us to take away from this, I guess, is what kind of Savior do we want? What kind of Savior do we want in Jesus? I know for some, we are very interested in political wins. And listen, politics is important. Obviously, in today's day and age, when we have this pandemic, our government officials are very important. Who we elect is very important. But sometimes we merge Christianity with politics, and I'm not sure that's the best idea. That's what Judas wanted. He wanted Jesus to be a political leader. He wanted the rule of God, the law of God, to be merged into politics. That's what he wanted, but that's not what Jesus delivered. Judas wanted power. He wanted the kingdom of heaven to create power. And sometimes in the course of our political history, we merge power with Christianity, and we get very excited when Christians are, quote, in power. I'm not sure that's exactly the motivation of Jesus. Again, politics is important. Having influence has its place. But the quest for political power and the quest for influence and the quest for prosperity, Judas wanted prosperity for himself. He envisioned that he was going to rise with the king and he was going to be the treasurer of this new kingdom. And when the vision of his own personal prosperity was diminishing as Jesus continued to walk in humility and self-sacrifice, he was disillusioned. So let's check ourselves. Are we motivated by political power? Are we motivated by prosperity? Is that what we want? Are we praying, God, make me prosperous? Are we thinking that if we do well for God, that God will do well for us? If we obey, if we're good, that God will somehow bless us and answer our prayers? This is the mindset of Judas. He wanted a political win. He wanted political influence. He wanted political power. He wanted personal prosperity. He wanted God to serve him. And that's not what Jesus delivered. So as a disillusioned follower of Jesus, he betrayed him. And that was the link that the religious leaders needed to say to Rome, even one of his friends, even his core disciple, even his treasurer believes that he is a betrayer of the Roman Empire and a betrayer of the will of God. So let's be careful what we want from God. Let's be careful to not want the things Judas wanted. Let's be careful that we serve Jesus. We serve Jesus who came to serve and not to be served. We serve Jesus who came to be humble and to give his life away to others. And as we'll see in a couple of days, to even give his life on a cross to pay for the sins of the world. Thanks for joining us.